It was Christmas Eve, and the town was quiet but full of small lights and decorations on every house. The streets were cold, and people moved quickly, trying to finish their preparations. The protagonist was walking home, carrying a small bag of gifts. Feeling tired and thinking about the long day ahead, their mind was full of chores and worries about making everything perfect for the night. They did not notice the little shop tucked between two larger buildings until a sudden thought made them stop. It was a small place they had walked past many times but never entered today. Something about it seemed different, though. Door creaked softly as they stepped inside. The warmth of the shop welcomed them, and the smell of old wood and baked goods filled the air. It was quiet and calm. Unlike the busy streets outside, the shelves were filled with items that seemed ordinary at first glance, but there was something about the arrangement that made the protagonist pause and look closer. They moved slowly from shelf to shelf, noticing small trinkets, handmade ornaments, and stacks of books that looked very old. Near the back of the shop, something caught their attention. A small box half hidden behind other items seemed to call out to them. They bent down and carefully pulled it out. Dust floated gently in the light from the window. They opened it slowly, and inside there was an object that seemed out of place in such a cozy shop. It was old and worn, but beautiful. The protagonist held it in their hands, feeling a strange connection, as if it belonged somewhere, but they did not know where. Time passed, almost unnoticed, as they examined the item. It was unlike anything they had seen before. The texture, the shape, and even the faint smell brought back distant memories that they could not place. They felt a curiosity that made them want to know the story behind it. The shopkeeper appeared from a corner, smiling quietly, and asked if they needed any help. The protagonist shook their head but kept looking at the object, feeling that it had a story to tell. Finally deciding to take it home, they paid for the item with a few coins they had in their pocket and stepped back into the cold evening. The streets seemed different now, as if the simple act of finding the object had changed everything. They walked slowly, thinking about what it could mean and what kind of story it carried. The lights from the houses reflected in the snow, and the air smelled of pine and smoke from chimneys. The town felt alive and quiet at the same time, making the walk home peaceful and reflective. At home, the protagonist placed the object carefully on the table and sat down to look at it more closely. They turned it over in their hands, noticing details that seemed to tell a silent story. Each mark, each scratch seemed deliberate, as if someone had wanted to leave a message. The protagonist thought about the shopkeeper and the quiet way they had watched them look at the item. It was as if the shopkeeper knew that this discovery was meant for them. Evening turned to night, and the lights in the town grew brighter. The protagonist could not stop thinking about the object. They wondered where it had come from, who had made it, and why it had ended up in that small shop. They felt a strange excitement mixed with calm, as if they had stumbled upon something important without knowing it yet. The anticipation of discovering the story behind it filled their mind, making it hard to focus on anything else. As they looked around their small home, they noticed the ordinary objects that surrounded them. Contrast between the familiar and the mysterious item in their hands made them think about how life often hid secrets in plain sight. How simple moments like stopping in a shop on a cold evening could change everything without warning. They realized that sometimes the smallest actions led to the biggest discoveries, and that, perhaps, this Christmas Eve was about to become unforgettable. They spent hours examining the item, trying to understand its purpose or history. They sketched it in a notebook, made small notes, and compared it to pictures they found in an old family album. Nothing seemed to match, yet everything felt connected. The protagonist felt a growing sense of wonder and responsibility, as if uncovering its story was now part of their own journey.
No.
They knew that tomorrow, or the next day, they would need to do more research to understand it fully. The night deepened, and the snow outside softened the sounds of the town. The protagonist sat quietly, watching the lights flicker and thinking about the possibilities. The object lay before them, almost glowing in the soft lamplight. Its presence filled the room with an energy that was hard to explain. It was not magical in the ordinary sense, but it carried a weight of history and human experience that made it feel alive. Protagonists thought about their own life and how routine and predictable it had been until this moment. The stop at the shop had seemed like a small decision, but it had opened a door to something unexpected. They felt gratitude for the chance to encounter it, and a curiosity that was hard to satisfy. they made a promise to themselves too. Follow where the story would lead, even if it took them far from their usual comfort. Zonas, the night grew colder. They wrapped the object in a soft cloth and placed it in a special box to keep it safe. They knew they would return to it in the morning. With fresh eyes and a clear mind, there was a feeling of anticipation and hope as they prepared to sleep. The town outside was quiet under the soft blanket of snow, but inside the home there was a sense of potential and possibility that had not been there before. The protagonist drifted into sleep with thoughts of the object and the shop lingering in their mind. They dreamed of distant places, hidden stories, and the faces of people who might have touched it before them in their dream. They could feel the passage of time and the layers of life that had led to this one quiet moment on Christmas Eve. It was as if the entire world had paused to make room for this small but significant discovery. Morning came with soft light streaming through the windows. The protagonist awoke feeling refreshed and eager to continue their exploration. They made tea and sat at the table once again, looking at the object with renewed interest. Every detail seemed more vivid, and every question more pressing. They knew that the journey of discovery was just beginning, and that the simple stop at a shop the previous evening had changed the course of their day and perhaps their life. They carefully planned the steps they would take to learn more. They would visit local archives, speak to people who might have knowledge of such items, and explore places connected to the history it hinted at. The protagonist felt a sense of purpose and excitement that had been missing from their daily routine. For a long time, the stop on Christmas Eve had opened a new chapter full of mystery and promise, and they were ready to follow it wherever it led. Morning sunlight poured into the small home as the protagonist sat at the table gazing at the object. From the shop, the air smelled faintly of pine and freshly brewed tea. They felt a mix of excitement and nervousness as they held it carefully in their hands. Every angle revealed tiny details that were new with each look. It was as if the object carried hidden stories waiting to be discovered. Protagonists began to think about the shop and the quiet shopkeeper who had watched them with knowing eyes. They wondered about the journey that had brought the object there and who had owned it. Before, the curiosity that had sparked the day before now felt like a gentle fire that could not be ignored. They decided to take the first steps toward understanding its history, started by looking through old family albums and photographs. Each picture reminded them of moments long past and distant relatives who had lived lives filled with small adventures. The object in their hands seemed to echo some of the emotions they saw in the photographs. The feeling was both comforting and mysterious. It made them want to know more about the connections between past and present. After breakfast, they bundled up and stepped outside. The town was still quiet and covered in a thin layer of snow. The streets glistened in the sunlight, and children left small footprints as they ran to deliver gifts to neighbors. The protagonist walked slowly toward the town library, thinking about what they might find there. Were old records, their books of history, and possibly information about the kind of object they had found. The library was calm and warm with the scent of paper and polished wood. The protagonist explained to the librarian that they were looking for information about an old object and were hoping to find something that could guide them. The librarian smiled and led them to a section filled with local history books and records from past decades. The protagonist carefully turned each page, making notes and sketches of anything that looked similar to their discovery hours, passed unnoticed as they examined the records. There were small clues in photographs and handwritten notes that suggested the object might have belonged to someone important in the town. Long ago, the protagonist felt a thrill of discovery mixed with the gentle weight of history. They imagined the life of the person who had once held the object, and how it had traveled through time to rest in their hands. A faint sound of bells from the nearby church reminded them that Christmas was still approaching and the day was moving quickly. They realized that the discovery was not just about the object, but about the feelings it evoked and the stories it connected to. The protagonist felt a strong sense of purpose as they planned the next steps in their investigation. They wanted to talk to older residents of the town and perhaps visit places that had historical significance. As the afternoon lights softened, the protagonist left the library and wandered through familiar streets with a new perspective. Every building and corner seemed to hold a memory or a story waiting to be uncovered. They paused in front of an old house with faded shutters and imagined the families that had lived there and the lives they had led. Each thought made them feel closer to understanding the journey of the object in the history. They stopped at a small cafe for a warm drink and sat quietly sketching the object and jotting down questions that had come to mind. The people around them moved with ease, chatting softly and enjoying the holiday season, yet the protagonist felt a connection to something larger than the immediate surroundings. It was a connection that made the world feel wider and full of possibilities. With renewed energy, they decided to visit the home of an elderly resident known for remembering details about the town's past. The walk was slow, but the protagonist felt that every step brought them closer to understanding. They carried the object carefully, as if it were a fragile piece of time itself. When they arrived, the elderly person welcomed them warmly and listened intently. As the protagonist described what they had found and their curiosity about its history, the elderly resident smiled and began to share memories of people who had lived in the town decades ago. They spoke of small acts of kindness, celebrations, and family stories that had been passed down from generation to generation. As they listened, the protagonist felt a deepening of their connection to the past. It was not just the object that was important, but the lives and experiences it represented. Stories were shared about a family who had once owned a similar object and how it had been treasured through difficult times and joyful moments alike. The elderly residents spoke of the traditions they followed and the ways in which small objects could carry meaning beyond their physical form. Each detail added a layer to the protagonist's understanding and inspired them to continue their exploration. Time moved gently as the protagonist took in each story. They realized that the discovery was guiding them toward understanding not only the object, but also the lives that had intersected with it. They felt a quiet excitement as they imagined retracing the steps of those who had come before and uncovering hidden connections in the town. As evening approached, they walked back home, thinking about the discoveries and the people they had met. The object rested safely in their bag and seemed to hum with quiet energy. It was a reminder that curiosity and attentiveness could open doors to new understanding, and that small actions could lead to meaningful experiences. The protagonist felt grateful for the day and the unexpected journey that had begun with a simple stop on Christmas Eve at home. They sat by the window watching the one last light fade and the first stars appear. The snow on the rooftops sparkled and the town seemed to hold its breath for the holiday. The protagonist opened their notebook and began to organize the notes, sketches, and memories they had collected. It was a way to honor the stories and prepare for the next steps in uncovering the full history of the object. They reflected on the conversations with the elderly resident and the library records. It was clear that the object had a story that spanned generations and touched many lives. The protagonist felt a deep sense of connection to the town and its people, and a responsibility to continue seeking the story. It was more than curiosity. It was a desire to understand the threads that linked past and present in a meaningful way. The night grew quiet as the protagonist prepared for sleep, yet the mind remained active, filled with ideas, possibilities, and questions. They imagined the journey ahead and the discoveries that awaited. They felt a calm determination that the story of the object would be uncovered with care, patience, and respect. Each small step brought new understanding and a growing appreciation for the ordinary moments that led to extraordinary experiences. As they drifted into sleep, the protagonist held the object close, thinking about the people who had touched it before them and the lives it had witnessed. The Christmas Eve stop now seemed like a turning point, a moment when the ordinary had opened into the extraordinary, and a simple decision had begun a journey of discovery, curiosity, and connection that would continue to unfold in the days to come. Next morning, the protagonist woke with a sense of purpose and excitement. They felt a gentle anticipation as they prepared for the day ahead. Their mind was filled with the details they had gathered, the stories they had heard, and the questions that still lingered. The object from the shop lay on the table, waiting to guide them on the next stage of its journey. After A simple breakfast, they wrapped the object carefully and stepped outside. The town was quiet with the soft sound of snow underfoot. The air smelled of pine and distant smoke from chimneys. Their thoughts wandered to the people they might meet today. And the places that could reveal more about the object's past. Every step felt like part of a larger story that was unfolding in small moments. They decided to visit the town museum first, hoping that the historical displays might provide context. The museum was calm and smelled faintly of wood and old paper. The curator greeted them warmly and listened as the protagonists described the object and their quest for information. The curator led them to a section filled with local artifacts and photographs from decades past. The protagonist carefully examined each display, comparing it with the object in their hands. They noted similarities in craftsmanship, materials, and patterns. Some items seemed to share a subtle story of care and use. Across time, the curator shared information about families who had lived in the town and the objects they had treasured. Over time, it became clear that this simple object was part of a larger history connected to ordinary lives and everyday moments that held meaning. The protagonist felt a growing connection to the past. The stories they heard from the curator painted pictures of resilience and kindness, of celebrations and quiet acts of love. Each detail made the object seem more alive, as if it had witnessed these moments and carried them forward. The protagonist realized that uncovering the story was not just about the object, but about understanding the lives it had touched. Leaving the museum, they wandered through streets they had known all their life, yet saw them now with new eyes. Each shop corner, each doorway seemed to hold memories and hidden tales. The protagonist paused in front of an old bakery, imagining the hands that had kneaded dough and the laughter that had filled the room. Decades ago, they thought about how the object might have passed through such places and felt a sense of wonder at the invisible threads that connected people across time. They stopped at a small park where children played and adults walked. The protagonist sat on a bench, sketching the object and jotting down observations. They noticed how life moved around them with quiet rhythms and small joys. The connection between the present and the past became clearer as they imagined the journeys of the people who had interacted with the object. The idea that small objects could carry stories across generations made them feel part of something larger. After some reflection, they decided to visit an older neighbor known for remembering details about the town's history. The walk was brisk and the air cold but refreshing. The protagonist felt a sense of anticipation as they approached the house. They were welcomed inside and offered a warm drink while the neighbor listened intently. As they described the object and their search for its story, the neighbor shared memories of families who had lived in the area. Decades ago, they spoke of traditions that had been passed down, the ways objects had been cared for, and the significance they had held in small celebrations and everyday routines. The protagonist listened carefully, absorbing each detail and connecting it to the clues they had already gathered. It was like assembling a puzzle where each story and observation revealed a new piece. Hours passed as stories were exchanged, and the protagonist made notes and sketches. The object lay on the table, glowing softly in the gentle light of the room. Its presence seemed to invite reflection and curiosity. Every mark and scratch became a symbol of life experienced. In time past, they realized that the object's journey was intertwined with the lives of many, and that uncovering its history was revealing the essence of human connection and memory. The day moved toward evening, and the protagonist walked home feeling a mix of exhaustion and excitement. Their mind was full of new questions, new ideas, and new appreciation for the ordinary moments that formed the extraordinary story of the object. They felt inspired to continue exploring each lead and meeting more people who might hold pieces of the story. At home, they laid the object carefully on the table and reviewed their notes. They sketched additional details and wrote down thoughts that had come from their interactions. During the day, each observation felt like a key that could unlock another part of the story. The protagonist felt gratitude for the people who had shared their memories and the chance to follow a journey that began with a simple stop on Christmas Eve. As night fell, they reflected on the connections between the past and present. The object had become a symbol of curiosity and patience and the importance of small decisions. They realized that each step they had taken and each story they had heard was part of a larger tapestry of human experience. The protagonist felt a gentle excitement, imagining the discoveries that waited in the coming days and the lessons that would emerge from understanding the object's journey. The room was quiet, and the town outside settled under a soft blanket of snow. The protagonist sat by the window, gazing at the lights flickering in the distance. Thinking about the lives the object had touched and the stories it carried, they felt a sense of peace and anticipation. They knew that the journey was ongoing and that each new encounter and each new piece of information would bring them closer to understanding the full story. They carefully placed the object in a protective box and prepared their notes. For the next day, the warmth of the room and the quiet of the evening provided a space for reflection and planning. The protagonists considered the places they would visit, the people they would speak to, and the questions they would ask. Each thought was guided by curiosity and a deepening appreciation for the hidden stories that objects and memories could hold. As sleep approached, they held the object close and thought about the journey so far. The simple act of stopping at a shop on Christmas Eve had opened a door to discovery, curiosity, and connection. It had revealed that even ordinary moments could lead to extraordinary experiences, and that the pursuit of understanding could illuminate lives past and present. The protagonist drifted into sleep with a sense of wonder and readiness for the next stage of the story. The following morning, the protagonist woke feeling a gentle excitement. They knew that today could bring new discoveries about the object that had captured their curiosity. The air outside was crisp and clear, and the town seemed full of small possibilities. Their steps were careful as they wrapped the object and headed out with a sense of purpose and anticipation. They decided to visit a distant part of town where older houses and shops told stories of generations long past. The streets were quiet and lined with snow-covered trees. The protagonist moved slowly, taking in each detail: the texture of old brick, the worn wood of door frames, and the faint smell of fireplaces seemed to echo the history of the town. They thought about the lives that had unfolded here and the objects that had passed from hand to hand, carrying memory and meaning. The first stop was a small antique store tucked between larger buildings. The store was warm and filled with shelves of items from many decades. The owner greeted them warmly and listened as they described the object and the story they were trying to uncover. The protagonist carefully showed the object, allowing the owner to examine it closely. Their eyes lit up as they recognized similarities with other items that had once belonged to families in the town. Stories began to emerge about the object and its possible origins. The owner spoke of traditions where small items were kept as symbols of family connection and love of life. They described how objects like this traveled through generations, carrying memories and emotions that could not be measured or seen yet were deeply felt. The protagonist felt a sense of awe and respect as they listened, imagining the people who had cared for the object and the lives it had touched. Leaving the shop, they walked slowly to a nearby square where older residents often gathered. The protagonist found a quiet bench and sat, sketching the object and writing notes. The scene around them seemed to reflect the stories they had just heard. Children played softly, and a few adults chatted quietly. The protagonist imagined how this square might have looked decades ago and how the object might have passed through the hands of people who had walked these streets. They were approached by an elderly resident who noticed their focus and curiosity. The protagonist shared the story of the object and their journey of discovery. The elderly person listened intently and then began to recount memories of families and traditions that had once been central to the town. They spoke of celebrations, small gestures of kindness, and the ways in which objects carried meaning across time. Each story added depth and color to the protagonists' understanding art's past as the protagonist absorbed each detail and compared it with the notes and sketches they had gathered. The object seemed to grow more alive with each story. Each mark and scratch on its surface now felt like a record of life lived and emotions experienced. They realized that the journey was not just about uncovering a simple story, but about connecting with the human experiences that had shaped the object in the town. In the late afternoon, they visited a quiet riverside path where people often walked to reflect. The snow had softened the sound of footsteps, and the water flowed gently, creating a soothing rhythm. The protagonist sat by the edge of the river, thinking about all they had learned. The object lay carefully beside them and seemed to hum softly with the presence of memory and life that it carried. they felt a growing connection to the past and to the lives of the people who had touched the object. They took out their notebook and began to piece together a timeline based on what they had learned from the antique store, the elderly resident, and the town museum. They sketched connections between families' traditions and the paths that the object might have traveled. Each note felt like a step closer to uncovering the full story. They realized that the object had witnessed generations of small joys and hardships and had quietly carried these experiences forward. Evening approached, and the protagonist walked back home reflecting on the revelations of the day. Each encounter, each story had added layers of understanding and meaning. They felt a sense of gratitude for the people who had shared their memories and for the simple stop at the shop that had begun this journey. It was clear that the object had led them not just to a story about the past, but to insights about connection, care, and the importance of noticing small moments at home. They set the object on the table and reviewed the day's findings. They carefully compared sketches, notes, and memories, assembling a clearer picture of the journey. The object seemed to hold a silent wisdom, as if acknowledging the protagonist's dedication and curiosity. They felt a quiet joy knowing that they were uncovering a story that was larger than themselves and deeply rooted in the lives of many. The night was calm and the town glowed under the soft blanket of snow. The protagonist sat by the window thinking about the next steps in their exploration. They knew that the revelation of the object's full story was close, and that it would bring understanding and connection that went beyond mere curiosity. Each story and memory had brought them closer to a life-changing discovery that began with a simple choice on Christmas Eve. They prepared for sleep. They held the object gently, feeling the history and emotions it carried. The journey had already changed their perspective, making them see ordinary life in a new light. The protagonist felt ready for the revelations that awaited them and the impact they would have on their own life and the lives of others. They drifted into sleep with a sense of anticipation and peace, knowing that tomorrow would bring the culmination of the journey and the full story of the object and the lives it touched across time. The next morning, the protagonist woke with a feeling of quiet anticipation. They knew that today would bring the final pieces of the journey together. The air was crisp and clear, and the town was peaceful under the soft blanket of snow. They carefully wrapped the object and set out knowing that this day could change their understanding and perspective forever. They walked through familiar streets, noticing details that had seemed ordinary before, but now held meaning. Every step was thoughtful and deliberate, as if the town itself was guiding them toward the discovery. The snow sparkled in the sunlight, and the faint sounds of holiday preparations echoed softly in the distance. Their mind was focused on the connections they had made and the stories they had collected over the past days. Protagonists first visited an old archive in the town where records of families and events were kept. They explained their search to the archivist, who welcomed them and provided access to documents and photographs. The protagonist carefully examined each record, comparing it with the object and the stories they had gathered. They noticed small patterns, details that had been overlooked, and clues that connected the object to a family that had once lived in the town. Long agoers passed as they pieced together information. Each document revealed a new layer of history and meaning. The object had been cherished by generations of a family who had valued it not for its material worth but for the memories and connections it carried. The protagonist felt a deep sense of awe, imagining the life of each person who had held it and the moments of joy and challenge it had witnessed. The object was a bridge between past and present, linking ordinary lives with a quiet but profound significance. In the afternoon, they decided to visit the house where the family had lived. Although the building had changed over the years, the protagonist could sense the history embedded in the walls and the garden. They imagined the children who had played there, the meals shared, and the conversations that had filled the rooms. The object seemed to hum softly with memory and presence, connecting the protagonist to a lineage of life and love. They met a distant relative of the family who welcomed them warmly and shared stories and memories that had been passed down. The protagonists listened intently, absorbing each detail and sketching connections in their notebook. The relatives spoke of small acts of kindness, celebrations, and traditions that had been held dear over the years. They described how objects like the one the protagonist had found carried significance across generations. becoming symbols of love, continuity, and human connection, the protagonist felt a profound shift. As the full story began to emerge, they realized that the object had guided them on a journey not just through history but into understanding life itself. It was a reminder of the importance of noticing small moments, the value of family and community, and the quiet ways in which lives intertwine across time. They felt gratitude for the people who had shared their memories and for the chance to follow a path that began with a simple stop on Christmas Eve. As evening approached, they walked back through the town, reflecting on the discoveries and the emotions that had been uncovered. The snow softened their footsteps, and the quiet streets seemed to hold the stories of generations in a gentle embrace.
Oh.
They carried the object carefully, feeling its weight and presence as a link between the past and their own life. They understood that this journey had changed them, making them more aware of connection, memory, and the beauty of ordinary life at home. They placed the object on the table and began to write down the full story as they understood it. The notes, sketches, and memories collected over the past days came together, creating a tapestry of life experiences and relationships. The protagonist felt a sense of completion and fulfillment, knowing that the object's journey had been revealed and its significance honored. They reflected on how small decisions and simple moments could open doors to understanding and transformation. The night fell, and the town glowed softly under the lights of holiday decorations. The protagonist sat by the window, feeling a deep sense of peace. They thought about the people who had lived before them, the lives connected by the object, and the ways in which stories endure through time. Each memory, each detail, each connection added richness to their own life and perspective. They realized that the journey had not only uncovered a story, but had also created new understanding and empathy within them. They carefully wrapped the object and placed it in a safe place, knowing that it had completed its journey into their hands and now held a full story that could be shared. The protagonist felt ready to share what they had learned with others, not for fame or recognition, but to honor the lives and memories connected to it. They understood that the simplest acts of curiosity, attention, and care could uncover extraordinary stories and life lessons. As they prepared for sleep, they looked around their small home, feeling a sense of gratitude, and wondered the stop at the shop on Christmas Eve had seemed minor at the time, but it had opened a door to a life-changing discovery. It had connected them to people past and present, had revealed the significance of ordinary objects and moments, and had transformed their understanding of connection, memory, and the passage of life. The protagonist drifted into sleep with the object nearby, thinking about the journey and the lives it represented. They felt a sense of fulfillment, knowing that they had followed the path of curiosity and care to uncover a story that would remain with them forever. It was a reminder that life was full of hidden stories, and that the simplest choices could lead to the most meaningful discoveries. The Christmas Eve stop had become a turning point, marking a journey of discovery, connection, and understanding that would be remembered for years to come. Morning after the final discovery, the protagonist woke with a sense of quiet reflection. The object lay on the table, softly illuminated by the first light of day. The town outside was peaceful, and the snow sparkled as if holding tiny secrets waiting to be discovered. The protagonist sat by the window, thinking about the journey and how a simple stop on Christmas Eve had unfolded into something far greater than they could have imagined. They remembered each step of the journey, the people which shared stories, the places they had visited, and the moments of connection that had revealed the significance of the object. Every detail seemed important and yet intertwined with something larger than themselves. They felt a growing awareness that life was full of small moments that could hold immense meaning if noticed with care and attention. After simple breakfast, they decided to take a walk through the quiet streets, reflecting on how the town had become a place of discovery and reflection in the past days. Every corner held memories and hints of the past. The protagonist imagined how the town had changed over the decades and how objects like the one they held had silently connected people across generations. Each thought added depth to their understanding of history, community, and human experience. They walked to the small park where they had spent time sketching and taking notes. The snow crunched softly under their feet, and the air carried the faint smell of pine and wood smoke. The protagonist sat on a familiar bench, looking at the object once again. Feeling its weight and presence, they thought about the people who had touched it before them and the lives it had witnessed. It was not just a piece of material, but a vessel of stories and emotions that had endured through time. As they sat quietly, an elderly neighbor approached and smiled softly. The protagonist shared thoughts about the journey and the meaning they had found in the object. The neighbor nodded understandingly and spoke of the importance of noticing small moments of connection and of cherishing the past while living fully in the present. Their words reinforced what the protagonist had already begun to feel: the quiet power of curiosity, care, and human connection. Protagonist decided to visit the town museum once more to reflect on the discoveries and see if there were any final clues to add to their understanding. The curator welcomed them warmly and allowed them to revisit records, photographs, and artifacts that had become familiar friends over the past days. As they carefully examined each item, they noticed connections and details that had been overlooked before. The sense of history and continuity grew stronger with every page and photograph they studied. Hours passed as the protagonist made final notes, sketches, and observations. They realized that the object had a story that was complete yet open-ended. It had guided them to its understanding, but it also invited them to consider the lives of those who had interacted with it in ways they could not fully know. The protagonist felt a profound respect for the ordinary people who had lived full lives marked by small acts of love, kindness, and resilience. In the late afternoon, they returned to the quiet streets, carrying the object carefully. Each step was thoughtful. As they reflected on how far the journey had brought them, they stopped at an old bakery and imagined the lives that had passed through its doors. The smells, the sounds, and the small moments of interaction all seemed to echo the stories they had collected. Each connection reinforced the idea that life was full of hidden stories waiting to be noticed and appreciated. They paused by a small bridge over the town river, where the water flowed gently beneath the ice and snow. The protagonist thought about how the object had traveled through time and space to reach them, how many hands had held it, how many eyes had admired it, how many lives it had quietly touched. The sense of continuity and connection filled them with gratitude and a quiet joy that was deeper than excitement or curiosity. Evening approached, and the town was bathed in a soft glow from streetlights and decorations. The protagonist walked home slowly, reflecting on the journey and the lessons it had revealed. They realized that life was not only about big events, but about noticing small details and being open to the unexpected discoveries that could change perspective and deepen understanding. The simple stop on Christmas Eve had become a symbol of attentiveness, curiosity, and care that carried meaning far beyond the day itself. Home, they placed the object gently on the table and began to write a final reflection on what they had learned. Each note and sketch captured not only the story of the object, but the stories of the people whose lives it had touched. The protagonist felt a sense of completion, yet also an awareness that life continued to hold mysteries and connections waiting to be discovered. The object had taught them to see life differently and to value the ordinary moments that often passed unnoticed. They spent the evening looking out the window at the town. The snow-covered rooftops reflected the soft lights and created a sense of calm and possibility. The protagonist thought about the people they had met, the stories they had heard, and the emotions they had felt. Each memory seemed alive, carrying a quiet wisdom that could guide them in the future. They realized that the journey had been about more than discovery. It had been about understanding, connection, and the enduring power of human experience. As night fell, they prepared for sleep, feeling a sense of peace and fulfillment. The object rested nearby as a reminder of the journey and the lives it had touched. The protagonist thought about the simple choice to stop at the shop and how it had led to such meaningful exploration. They felt gratitude for the journey, for the people who had shared their stories, and for the lessons that had been revealed about noticing moments, appreciating history, and cherishing connection. They drifted into sleep with a sense of wonder and hope. The town outside was quiet and still, and the snow seemed to hold the secrets of generations within it. The protagonist understood that life was full of small choices that could open doors to understanding, joy, and connection. The Christmas Eve stop had become a life-changing moment, a reminder of the power of curiosity, attention, and care, and a symbol of the beauty Hidden in ordinary life, the morning light came softly through the windows as the protagonist awoke, feeling a gentle sense of reflection. They thought about the days that had passed since the Christmas Eve stop and the journey the object had taken them on. Each moment, each conversation, and each discovery had left a mark on their understanding of life and the people around them. They prepared for the day with care, feeling a quiet excitement for what might unfold next. The object rested on the table beside them and seemed to radiate a presence that encouraged thought and attention. The protagonist held it carefully and reflected on the connections it had revealed between past and present, the small act of curiosity on Christmas Eve had grown into a deep exploration of human experience, memory, and connections. Stepping outside, the town was quiet, yet full of small details that had previously gone unnoticed. The protagonist walked along familiar streets, seeing them with new eyes. The soft crunch of snow beneath their feet and the faint smells of pine and wood smoke created a sense of calm and focus. Every corner seemed alive with the stories of people who had lived there and the subtle echoes of the lives that had touched the object they carried. They decided to visit the riverside, where the water flowed gently under the winter sky. The snow softened, the sounds of footsteps and the flowing water provided a peaceful rhythm. The protagonist sat on a bench and took out their notebook to review sketches, notes, and reflections collected over the past days. Each detail seemed to hold significance and revealed connections that had been previously hidden. They felt a sense of wonder at how a single object could open a window into history, emotion, and human experience. An elderly passerby noticed their focus and stopped to chat. The protagonist shared the story of the object and the journey of discovery it had prompted.
Ow.
The elder listened quietly and then spoke of the importance of observing small moments and cherishing connections. They told stories of their own family and traditions where objects had carried meaning across generations. Each story added depth to the protagonist's understanding and reinforced the lessons they had begun to see about life, memory, and connection. The protagonist decided to visit the town library again to explore additional records and photographs that might provide further insight. They spoke with the librarian and were given access to old maps and journals from decades past. They carefully examined each item, noting patterns and small details that connected to the object and the stories they had been told. Each discovery added a layer to their understanding and a deeper sense of connection to the lives it had touched. Hours passed unnoticed as they traced the history and imagined the people who had once held the object. The protagonist felt a growing sense of gratitude for the ordinary moments of life that had been captured and preserved through the stories and objects of the past. They realized that understanding the journey of the object was also a journey into understanding empathy, kindness, and the value of paying attention to the small details that form human lives. In the afternoon, they walked to a quiet street lined with old houses, imagining the families who had lived there and the moments of joy and challenge that had unfolded. Each step was thoughtful and reflective as they connected the object to the lives it had intersected. The sense of continuity and shared experience filled them with a quiet joy and a sense of purpose that extended beyond curiosity and into appreciation for the human experience. They stopped at a small cafe to rest and review their notes. The warmth of the room and the faint sounds of conversation created a comforting atmosphere. They sketched additional details of the object and organized the stories and memories they had collected. Each piece fit together like a puzzle, revealing the depth and beauty of the object's journey and the lives it had touched across generations. As evening approached, they returned home, walking slowly and savoring each step. The snow sparkled softly, and the town glowed with lights and decorations. The protagonist carried the object, carefully feeling its presence and reflecting on how a simple stop had led to such meaningful exploration. They felt gratitude for the people who had shared their stories, the places that held history, and the quiet moments that revealed connections hidden in everyday life. At home, they placed the object on the table and reviewed the journey from start to present. They thought about how curiosity, attention, and care had guided them to understanding and how each discovery deepened their sense of connection to the past and present. Each memory, each conversation, each sketch added richness to the story and to their own perspective on life. The night was quiet as they sat by the window watching the soft glow of the town beneath the snow. The protagonist felt a sense of peace and fulfillment, reflecting on the journey and the life-changing discovery that had begun with a small decision on Christmas Eve. They understood that the object had been a guide not only to its own history, but also to a broader understanding of life connection and human experience. They received final reflections, capturing the lessons of the journey and the significance of noticing small moments, valuing human connection, and appreciating the ordinary details of life that often hold extraordinary meaning. The object remained near them as a symbol of discovery, reflection, and continuity across generations. The protagonist felt a sense of readiness to carry the understanding and insights gained into daily life and into the future. Sleep approached. They looked around their home feeling gratitude for the journey, the discoveries, and the people who had shared their knowledge and memories. The Christmas Eve stop had seemed minor at first, but had become the catalyst for a profound exploration of history, memory, and connection. The protagonist drifted into sleep, feeling calm, inspired, and aware of the quiet power of small moments and the hidden stories that make life meaning.